Asian stock markets are slumping after US President Donald Trump announced sweeping global tariffs. In a ceremony at the White House, Trump declared a 10% baseline on imports from all countries, with significantly higher levies for nations that run trade surpluses with the US. China and the EU say they are prepared to respond.
On what he called his country's Liberation Day, Donald Trump announced the sweeping tariffs that he claims will see American industry reborn. And he said he could have gone a lot further with what he called reciprocal measures.
Including for nations that treat us badly, we will calculate the combined rate of all their tariffs, non-monetary barriers, and other forms of cheating. And because we are being very kind, we're kind people. Very kind. We will charge them approximately half of what they are and have been charging us. So the tariffs will be not a full reciprocal. I could have done that, yes, but it would have been tough for a lot of countries.
Trump hit the European Union, one of America's biggest trading partners, hard, imposing a 20% tariffs on all imports from the bloc. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the EU would be ready to respond if talks didn't solve the trade conflict.
We are already finalizing the first package of countermeasures in response to tariffs on steel. And we're now preparing for further countermeasures to protect our interests and our businesses if negotiations fail. I know that many of you feel let down by our oldest ally. Yes, we must brace for the impact that this will inevitably have. Europe has everything it needs to make it through the storm. We are in this together.
Aside from the existing 25% tariff on all foreign-made cars, Asia and the EU bore the brunt of the most eye-catching measures, with a 24% tax on goods from Japan among them.
Following this announcement, we have again told the U.S. government that the recent measures are extremely regrettable and have requested that they be reconsidered. We believe the recent measures and other trade restrictions imposed by the U.S. government could impact economic relations between Japan and the U.S. and ultimately the global economy and the multilateral trading system.
There were harsh words too from Australia, but Prime Minister said it would not be drawn into a trade war.
This is not the act of a friend. Today's decision will add to uncertainty in the global economy, and it will push up costs for American households. This is why our government will not be seeking to impose reciprocal tariffs. We will not join a race to the bottom that leads to higher prices and slower growth.
Economists say Trump's new tariffs hike the import taxes back to levels not seen since the start of the 20th century. Financial markets worldwide are already dropping in response to the president's announcement.
All right, let's get more from Stephen Beardsley from DW's Business Desk. Stephen, welcome.
Hi, Brush.
There'd been speculation for weeks as to the level of tariffs that will be put in place. Fair to say that what we are seeing now is worse than expected?
I think that's fair to say, absolutely. I think we've seen the market reactions, first of all, which the piece alluded to. Asian markets already dropping because of this. U.S. futures were falling, which means that probably the next session of markets in the U.S., we're going to see things fall as well. And that shows us that businesses, that they believe it's going to be worse than they had expected. They had tried to already price in some of these tariffs. We'd seen stocks falling for weeks in anticipation of this. Then at the last moment, we saw them come up as some buyers thought, you know what, it's probably an overreaction, what's going on in the markets. Now we've seen actually it may have been an underreaction. You know, this mixture of a universal tariff and a reciprocal tariff, 20% for the EU with that baseline 10%. The calculation is still sort of unclear. And as he referred to in his statements, these kind of non-tariff barriers that they've calculated in, which include value-added sales tax, for example. Those are really high here in Europe, and things like the difference in technical specifications between products. This is it's very difficult and it's very aggressive, you could say.
But what will all this lead to? I mean, Donald Trump keeps promising this golden era of American manufacturing. Will that come to be?
Yeah, the golden, the manufacturing that's supposed to just come flooding back into the U.S., most economists that we've spoken to have said, no, that's not going to happen. The fact of the matter is that it's not tariffs alone that dictate what happens to manufacturing in a nation, also what happens to the trade deficit. That's not just tariffs. The fact is, in the U.S., there's a large pull factor for U.S. dollars, for U.S. securities, for U.S. debt, all this kind of stuff. And so there is a lot of investment that floods in. And there are, of course, budget deficits that the U.S. runs, which makes a lot of that debt to buy. And so that adds to the trade deficit. On top of this, the U.S., like other advanced nations, is losing low-level manufacturing. It becomes more and more high-level. So it produces a lot of stuff still, but it requires fewer employees, for example. So if you look at the dollar value of what it produces, it's still manufacturing a lot of things. But if you look at the actual number of people employed, it's lower. And now, is it going to suddenly start producing the low-level objects, low-value objects like screws and like plush toys that it's outsourced long ago to places like China and Vietnam? Is it going to do that? Well, wages are so high in the U.S. that it's not really worth doing that. And so you spend money there that you could actually be investing into more high capital, advanced manufacturing that's really going to create more prosperity as a whole for the nation instead of this low-level manufacturing. That's the problem.
So that's the U.S. side of things. What happens to those countries that have been slapped with these tariffs, countries like China and Vietnam that you were talking about?
Yeah, Vietnam, 46% tariff effectively. We know that a lot of investment shifted to Vietnam a number of years ago as the first Trump tariffs really came into effect. Well, that investment, of course, creates jobs there for people working in factories for that kind of low-level manufacturing. They take that money, they spend on things. It's good for the local economies. That means that if the investment goes out of Vietnam looking for someplace else that's more cost-efficient to send stuff into the U.S., then there are people who are going to lose jobs. That means there's going to be less money. That can lead to crisis there for households. One other thing is that a lot of these countries, they export into the U.S. That brings in dollars into their country, which is used to stabilize their currencies, which can be very turbulent. So if you see fewer dollars coming in, that can also lead to currency issues. So there are problems for households.
To the wider point about fairness, because this is what Donald Trump keeps talking about, that the U.S. being treated unfairly by friend and foe alike. I mean, does he have a point, given that factually, if you look at the tariff sheets, the U.S. historically has imposed lower tariffs compared to the higher trade barriers that other countries have imposed on it?
That's right. He does a really good job for the domestic audience of selling that with that sheet, saying, look, we're paying more, they're paying less. But there's a reason why previous administrations have set things up that way, and that's because the U.S. has traditionally believed that free trade around the globe was to their benefit. You tether more nations to your country with those trade relationships, and that has a political effect as well. It's why the U.S. has had so many allies. It's why it's been able to grow prosperous, in fact. The question is that not all, or the issue is that not all sectors in the American society obviously feel that they've had a share in that prosperity, and that's a very domestic issue for the U.S., and that's the audience that he is speaking to.
We leave it there for the moment. Stephen Beardsley, thanks so much for breaking that down for us. Let's get more now on how the European Union is responding. Let's speak to our correspondent, Lucia Schulten, who is at the European Parliament in Strasbourg. Lucia, good morning. We heard European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen in our report there saying that the EU is ready to act. What can we expect?
Yeah, so the European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen has said that they're preparing countermeasures, and the most likely countermeasure at this point are probably counter tariffs. So we do not know which sectors would be hit. They're already preparing counter tariffs. She also restated that for the aluminium and steel tariffs that Donald Trump already imposed, so they're already working on that. But they're also working on more countermeasures. As I said, we do not know which sectors will be hit. The European Union has been not giving this away before. There's one idea which is flowing around here, especially in the European Parliament in Strasbourg, which is to also hit the digital service sector. So this is one possibility. We do not know yet if this will come, but the European Union also has more far-reaching tools than countermeasures. It could, for example, also enact a so-called coercive tool, which is an anti-coercive tool, which would have far more reaching consequences. For example, it would restrict access for US firms here in the European Union, but also that is not yet clear if this will come.
But the US has announced its tariffs. So the question is, will these tariffs affect European Union countries differently? And if so, who has the most to lose?
Yeah, first to give you the overall picture. So the European Union and the United States have the most important partnership when it comes to investment and trade. This is what the EU Commission has been stating. So it's really vital for the whole of the European Union. And then, of course, it depends a bit on when you look at the countries, what they export to the United States. So, for example, for Germany, the export of pharmaceuticals and cars is really important. For France, there is the aeronautic sector, which is really strong, but also for French winemakers, the US market is the most important export market. So it's a really important market for them. And also for Italy, for example, the agricultural products are being sent to the United States. This is an important sector for them. So it depends a little bit from country to country which sectors are being hit. But overall, the products which are being sent from the European Union are motor cars and vehicles, pharmaceutical products, and also medicines. So these are the areas which are most likely to be most hit by this decision.
How much unity can we expect within the European Union member states when it comes to responding to these tariffs?
So first of all, the European Commission, which is the executive body and is headed by Ursula von der Leyen here in the European Union, does have a lot of competence in this field. So even if there is not 100% unity, even if there's not every 27 of the member states on board for counter tariffs or another countermeasure, this would not mean that the European Union cannot act at all. But of course, the interests of the member states will be taken into account. There will be discussions about this, and there will be meetings where they will start to further prepare these countermeasures, and will also be taken into consideration the nation states. And the first meeting of such will take place on Monday. There the trade ministers will meet in Luxembourg, and then this process will come into rolling to also as in how these countermeasures are going to look like.
Lucia Schulten in Strasbourg. Thanks so much for that.